If I achieve enough good karma, then my next birth will be higher than this one until finally I achieve liberation, moksha, from the cycle of birth and rebirth. But karma can work the other way too. And if I start accumulating bad karma, then I will have to pay the consequences of that in the next life. There's no such thing as hell in Hinduism, but there is something that's almost as bad. I could be reborn as an untouchable.
Dr. Sharma, you were just talking about reincarnation. And that brings up another question I have with respect to this CNN program. Reza Aslan talks about reincarnation and karma, karma leading to sort of reincarnation, basically, and how that is a system of thought that justifies the caste system. And I was wondering if you think there's a necessary connection between karma, rebirth, and the caste system.
One can see how the doctrine of karma can be used by connecting it with reincarnation and then with caste to justify it. And to be frank, this has sometimes been attempted within the tradition also. We should keep in mind that it's a 5,000-year-old tradition. So it has happened in some parts of it. But this is not the main stream understanding of karma, for a very simple reason. This understanding makes everything dependent on past karma. Because one acted in a certain way in the past, therefore one is reborn in a certain way and reborn in a certain caste. But karma in Hinduism has never had the meaning of past karma alone. It also means present karma, like the conversation we are having, and future karma, what we will do in the future. So if you take a static view of the doctrine of karma and all the other doctrines connected with it, then it is possible to argue the way it has been presented. But this is grabbing the stick at the wrong end. Because the purpose, the main point of the doctrine of karma is that a human being is the architect of one's own destiny. So whatever is happening to one is ultimately the result of one's own actions. And therefore, by changing one's actions, one can also change one's destiny. So you might say that because a person has acted in a certain way in the past, the person has been born as an untouchable. But there is no karmic implication that the person has to remain an untouchable.
So my understanding is that a lot of the resistance that people feel towards this idea of karma is that it is blaming the victim.
May I put it the following way? That it holds the person responsible for what is happening to the person. But it does not mean that the person cannot change one's own destiny. This is a very common, and we can see an easier to fall into when discussing the doctrine of karma. If we keep looking at it with an orientation towards the past, one has to look at it from the perspective of what we can do now. As for blaming the victim, this is not how the tradition has interpreted the situation. So let me share with you what the tradition does in the face of seeing a person who is suffering. And we say, okay, that is that person's karma. And this also applies to the example of untouchability you gave earlier, right? Okay. Oh, so the person is to blame himself or herself for his or her condition. First of all, the tradition says that when you see somebody suffering, the relevant question to ask is not what he did to get into that condition, he or she, but what you can do to help the person to get out of it. In other words, what is your dharma, not karma? What is your dharma, not his or her karma, is what you have to deal with. Now, something very interesting follows from this. According to the doctrine of karma, if suppose you conclude that the person is to blame for his or her own condition, and you march on, then when you are in a similar condition, others will also march past you using the same argument, because we should never forget that the basic underlying principle of the doctrine of karma is justice.
So if I understand what you're saying, because there's present and future karma, the whole thing is so complex that we can't really judge someone else's karmic situation, but it's about...
Yeah, the tradition would probably prefer the word dynamic. When we say it is complex, it kind of inhibits our impulse to act. But when we say it is dynamic, it's making it very clear to you that you have to act, and in a certain way.
So the onus is really on us to take our own karma in hand.
To take responsibility for what happens to us. But not in such a way as to abuse this doctrine by becoming hard-hearted when dealing with the sufferings of others.
How then would you characterize or summarize the connection between karma, rebirth, and untouchability?
Are you giving me a free hand to do that?
Sorry.
Okay. Well, I'll make two connections. I would like to point out that India has the most comprehensive affirmative action program in the world. For not only the former untouchables, but also the lower castes, or you might say other lower castes in India. And I would like you to contrast the manner in which it has been accepted, or the fact that it enjoys broad acceptance in India, that this program enjoys broad acceptance in India as compared to the affirmative action programs in America, which are constantly running into legal hurdles and into the argument that I did not own slaves, my ancestors did. What accounts for this difference? I will not speculate on the problems people in the United States may have with their affirmation action programs. It is for them to deal with it. But I have a very strong feeling that the ungrudging and wholehearted acceptance, or one might say, well, there are always some naysayers, might say, the broad-based acceptance of this affirmative action program in India is based on the connection between karma, rebirth, and untouchability. That is, accepting moral responsibility for what has happened, even to others. So because we have this basic calculus, or rather even compass, the moral compass, that one is responsible for whatever happens around one, ultimately. That when the time comes, one should also make the sacrifices necessary to restore the equilibrium of justice, as it were. The second point I would like to make may be deduced from what Mahatma Gandhi once said, that the fact that we Indians had to undergo foreign rule for prolonged periods of time, in which the Indians were themselves treated no better than the untouchables and the lower castes, is the result of how we treated them in the past. He reflects in this manner after he had been turned down, or turned away rather, by a barber in South Africa, by a white barber in South Africa, because he was black.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, and I love that what Gandhi said, but if I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying that not only is karma, the doctrine of karma and rebirth, not essentially holding up these these power structures and power indifferences, but they are working to give the individual a sense of personal accountability and...
Well, Matilda, many religious doctrines are capable of being abused. They can be restrictive or negative in the implications we draw from them, and they can be liberative and positive. And it seems to me that the tradition may itself may have misapplied it in certain cases, and then has to undergo the consequences of that misapplications in keeping with the working of that doctrine itself, if you work within the framework of its beliefs and practices. This could also happen with other doctrines. The idea that God's will supersedes human will can lead to exploitation of others in the name of God's will, and can inspire men to great acts of heroism because they are submitting to God's will. So this tendency of doctrines to be misused or get abused is not unique to the doctrine of karma.